to the PraxisAuril KE and Coffee. The session has been recorded, just to say that up front. My name's Alasdair Cameron. I'm Director of Strategic Engagement with PraxisAuril. Tamsin, do you want to say hello?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Tamsin Mann, Director of Policy and Communications at PraxisAuril.
Okay, so for those of you who haven't been before, we will use the chat function for any questions or comments that come up. Once we get underway, we will try and pause for questions at various points. You can raise your hand, and if you would like, we can turn on your camera. Well, we can't. We can request you to turn on your camera and let you ask your question or comment in person. So the interaction's been great so far, so really would encourage you, especially on this topic, to help. As I said, we're recording it, so if you want to review it at a later date, you can do that as well. So this week's topic is a review of novel evaluation methods applied to KE funding. It's an SQW report supported by City Ready, commissioned by Research England. The report's dated November 2019, which seems like another world ago, but it's relatively recently been released into the public domain. So the snapshot, my uninformed snapshot, exploring a theory-based approach for the next iteration of HEIF. It's not previously been implemented systematically or at a national level, especially in a UK KE context with this theory-based approach. The report considers approaches to complement quantitative evidence on outcomes and impact of HEIF, and they call that the what, with systematic and robust evidence on the mechanisms by which HEIF or HEIF-funded activities lead to these outcomes and impact the how. You can have paraphrasing, well, almost exactly what was in the report. So specifically, they want to identify and test theory-based approaches that would enable the evaluation of HEIF to provide better explanation of how HEIF generates impact, and also provide more detail on HEIF impact beyond the return on investment, the ROI figure. So in that, provide a complete picture of value rather than that very high level average. Tamsin, what's behind this report?
This activity all got started about a year ago when Research England commissioned SQW. The word goes. So I was on I'm on the steering group for this project and help with the tender documents and select the consultancy that was going to take this work forward. So we've been quite closely involved right from the start. A lot of the activity that SQW have done has gone, they've been doing it themselves. They've been busy, as if you've looked at the report, you can see there's a very extensive literature review that's been done into this area, looking at these different options for evaluation models and these what could be feasible for use in evaluating HEIF. And one thing to say is this is about HEIF very specifically. It's not about knowledge exchange funding on large. It is about HEIF very specifically, and that's one important thing to bear in mind as as we talk about this. PraxisAuril was then a few members, about 20 members were involved much more deeply in a workshop that was held in October last year, where 2 modes of knowledge exchange were tested against the models that SQW had agreed with Research England would be taken forward for testing. And this report is really the outputs from that initial activity in phase 1. The phase 1 report has been released just after phase 2 workshops have taken place, and some people on the call may have been involved in those workshops, and that has looked at another 4 areas of knowledge exchange activity, and how the models that were developed in phase 1 apply to those areas of activity. Largely the same people who were involved in October, but with a few exceptions, because for areas like public engagement, actually, we know that there's a quite different set of members perhaps to people who've got sufficient depth of knowledge in commercialisation, tech transfer, and so we needed to just make sure we had that spread of representation. So some people in the community have had quite a lot of insight into these models, others will be kind of playing catch up and hopefully reading this report and not getting too worried about the descriptions of the models themselves, but focusing on potentially how they might be implemented. Okay,
and so I guess the next thing is so what does it mean for KE offices? If, as you say, this is about the evaluation of HEIF as a funding programme, and I think the conversation we had earlier, they're suggesting that we may be coming up at the point where another evaluation is due. But coming down to the KE offices and the practitioners, what does this mean for them?
Well, we're always, we do talk a lot about how we need more than, we need more than just numbers to talk about HEIF. We need more than just the HEBC data, because the HEBC data doesn't tell us really how effort in translates into, those outcomes and the outputs that, it's that kind of like, we talked about it being like the impact narrative is not clear. There's a bit of a black box around that, HEIF in at one end and something out at the other. So it's exploring that black box, which is to be welcomed, I think. We do want to get away from just having numbers. And yes, there's a HEIF evaluation roughly every 5 years. There was one in 2009, one in 2015. And so you can see that, it's about time there was another evaluation. We know that, Chris Skidmore, when he was Universities Minister, has taken the HEIF allocation up to 250 million. So if in return for more money, we can expect more scrutiny. That's something which Alice Frost at Research England has always been very clear about. So this is part of that scrutiny. But also HEIF is 20 years old next year. The original model started about 2001. So I think it is the right time to think about different ways that we can think about HEIF, how we can talk about the people involved, and how we can talk about the projects and the leverage that HEIF enables through the system. For KE offices specifically, I would say emphasise that this is about a sector evaluation. It's about the programme evaluation. It's not about, these methods aren't going to be used for looking at individual offices, although I think in the report it does say these techniques may be useful for offices to think about, if I suppose particularly larger organisations, thinking about how different bits of a knowledge exchange function might fit together and achieve certain goals. But it will give us a lot more information on just how people go about using their HEIF allocation. And I think that will be really interesting for us. It's something that we don't, well, you can read the HEIF strategies. There's an awful lot of information in the HEIF strategies, so you can go and read those. But I think at a, to bring something up to the sector aggregate level, have these consultants look at HEIF strategies, but also do interviews with KE practitioners and really tease out decision points and dependencies, internal factors, external factors. I think it'll be a tremendous amount of learning for us.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess you've hinted at it there. The ROI figure that we've got for HEIF and past evaluations is quite a blunt measurement. It's an aggregate measurement that's at a very high level. I guess if we start to delve into the minutiae of it, then is there a, well, I'm not wanting to use the word danger, but there's a possibility that we start to look at, it should highlight some areas that are more productive and give higher ROIs potentially than others which don't. And would that potentially then have an organisation like Research England suggesting that those areas might be better to focus HEIF spend on compared to others?
That's certainly not the objective of the programme, and actually one of the things that's been pleasing to talk about in the workshops that we've done is certainly people acknowledging that at the moment the workshops have covered 7 different knowledge exchange modes which were established back in 2015 in that last evaluation, and should be familiar to all of us from the the kind of knowledge exchange diagrams that we see Research England using. It may be that there are other things that HEIF is now doing, now achieving, particularly perhaps in that kind of civic mission mode, that need incorporating into those models. So the idea is to explore what HEIF enables institutions to do and what kind of value it enables them to create. Now that value may be a monetary value, but it may have a very clear social value or community value or a stakeholder value. And I hope that it will just form part of a broader range of evaluation tools, that it won't be the only thing that's used. You know, it will be used alongside the data, but it will also be used alongside case studies, for example. And it will, you know, we've got so much going on in the sector at the moment, but thinking particularly about the KE Concordat and mission-led knowledge exchange, that you know, defining a knowledge exchange mission because of the type of institution that you are, that you're working in, and the kind of things that you want to achieve with your knowledge exchange funding. If you can use these models to say, well, we want the outcome to be X, and therefore we need, you know, this model shows that we should have these steps previous to that if we want to achieve that kind of outcome. That should be very useful. But inevitably, there is always a risk with measuring anything, as we know, that you become the behaviour that you perceive others want to achieve.
Yeah. So I mean, you hinted at it there. The linkages, and the report certainly picks up on this, the interdependencies and linkages between lots of different KE activities that lead to you know, impact and outcomes. You know, is it realistic to think they'll be able to unpick those into what theories of change and map those through from a certain intervention through to the other side to a produced outcome?
I think there might be broad conclusions that you can reach at a sector level, but as we all know, it does really vary from place to place, and institution to institution. I think what will be, you know, the thing that's really struck me in the conversations we've had at the workshops is that HEIF funding comes back to capacity, and that's, you know, that's capacity in terms of people. So you've got KE professionals who are dedicated to getting projects going, to sustaining activity, to having a very different kind of commission to do things within an institution compared to somebody who's working in a research contract office, for example, or, you know, an academic who's kind of straddling that researcher role and a kind of KE role. It gives you permission to do things if you've got that knowledge exchange brief, and I think that's very important in universities today, and in any kind of research organisation. But HEIF, its capacity also in terms of budget, you know, small amounts of money that can be used to sustain activities which researchers and their partners see as significant or important, that, you know, you can't get through grant funding, for example. It's money, a bit like proof of concept funding. You might need a relatively small amount of money, but you need it now, and you need it on these kinds of terms. And if you've got a flexible budget, which is non-hypothecated, and you've got some authority over how that budget is used, then that gives you an ability to take some risks, to do some different kinds of activity and see what works, but also create a feeling of goodwill amongst the people that you're trying to support. So I think, I've forgotten the question you asked in the first place, Alasdair. I've gone off on a tangent.
It's fine. No, you answered it. It's fine. It's fine. So I mean, I guess the interesting bit on it is, you know, do we have a counterfactual?
Yeah. Well, I keep pointing to Wales. So we have Wales, where innovation funding was withdrawn back in 2014, and that was definitely, you know, then you saw anybody who wasn't attached to a project that could afford to kind of keep that post going. There was a decline in the number of KE professionals, and there was a bit of a lag, but there was a decline in the Hep C data. So we definitely saw that counterfactual. But also there is a relatively now small group of universities, I think it's about 20-25 universities, who don't get HEIF funding. And the report does say it might be interesting to use these same models, the same approach with those institutions who tend to be small and specialised and teaching led, and just see what kind of knowledge exchange they're doing, if any, and how they're doing it, what resources they're using, and whether HEIF might make a difference, a significant difference to what they're doing, or whether they're managing to do it despite not having HEIF. And that's where I suppose, you know, if you can manage to get people to focus on HEIF very tightly, you will keep bumping up against I suppose the edges of other funding streams. So you might say, well, we can get so far doing community engagement by using HEIF for these activities, but as soon as we want to do something bigger or in a different space, we need to ask these people for more funding to do that. Similarly, you know, there will come a point where you need to approach investors to invest in your spin outs. So, you know, you can't do everything with HEIF funding. So the project is really exploring, I suppose, the contribution that HEIF makes, it makes that very clear, but also the limitations, you know, what can't you cover with HEIF. So that will be interesting. And you will start to see the interdependencies, that leverage that we always talk about HEIF.
The report, there's quite an interesting sentence in it, which I should really have written down, where it recognises and wants to be honest and upfront about the potential risk, I guess, to Research England and going down this path. What do you see as the risk? Is it a case of be careful what question you ask, you might not like the answer?
Yeah, always. I think with this kind of exercise, I mean, you know, I was struck by the literature review section of the report, where initially, you know, they started off with about 1,000 documents that they thought might be relevant, and in the end they picked 13 that they thought were useful to report on in depth in this report. And that shows you how novel these methods are. And so of course you're going to, you know, you're testing a thesis here, you're not necessarily going to get the answer that you expected or all the answers that you wanted. And there might be some hard questions for Research England, there might be some hard lessons for us all. You know, we might be pleasantly surprised by some of the outcomes, but we might also be slightly shaken by some of the findings. So, and you know, we always say KE is a people business, and I think, you know, you can use these models and you can define activities and see causal links between things, but at the end of the day, if a person is employed on HEIF funding and you say, well, this person is employed to do this role, how well it comes down to how well that individual does that role as to how effective that bit of HEIF funding is. And that's something that this model can't assess. You know, that's a different question altogether. That's where our training comes in, of course, and the sharing of good practice and all that, you know, the community and our learning. But yeah, so yes, there's a point as to which, you know, this can only reach so far, this kind of analysis, I think. Right.
That sounds like a great place to open up the questions. I was going to try and quote Kennedy, who talked about GDP, saying it was the measure of or give the measure of everything but the value of nothing. So, I'm sure someone will correct me on my misquoting. So we're up for, we've got about 10 minutes left. So any questions or comments? If you want to raise your hand, then as I say, you can come on and join us.
I think Tony Tony, is you wanting to make a comment?
Has Tony got his hand up already?
Well, there was a comment. There was a
You need to unmute yourself. Oh, you go.
Yeah, I've done. Sorry, it takes me a second to do that. Sorry, jumping in there because I just need to go. But one concerns I have about what they've proposed is two factors. One is the long time gap between activities on the left, which are funded by HEIF, and the outcomes on the right. And I mean, as an example, in the past couple of years, the two big things which have happened within Cambridge Enterprise all originated in 1993.
Yeah.
And there's no one around. So actually judging our HEIF funding today on something which was really done 27 years ago is not a very good measure. And the other thing is, quite a number of years ago, we sat down and tried to do Ishikawa or fishbone diagrams, which are diagrams to find root causes of things for this. And you find there are so many complexities and other players and serendipity that it becomes impossible to trace it backwards. I mean, what would have happened if Google hadn't bumped into a Sun executive who didn't have enough time, so wrote them a check? They may not well have survived. And there's, throughout what we do, very recently, sort of imperial pandemic modelling has suddenly rocketed up in impact, not because of anything they did, but because the world changed to suddenly make it very relevant. So I'm wondering, sort of, in doing these, are we sort of actually making ourselves hostage to things we're not in control of?
Yeah, I mean, I think the timescales one is really important, and it does. Yeah, I don't know how, and I think a lot of this, you know, the evaluation can only be done with hindsight as well. You know, the case. That's why I suppose case studies I use so much, because they do give you a bit of a benefit of hindsight. But how far back do you go? But yes, we all know that the serendipity is a great factor in good knowledge exchange. So.
And we all know the old saying that success has many parents and failure
Yes.
is an orphan.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Tony.
Thanks.
So Isabel on the chat has said, you mentioned it's now in phase 2. Any information on timescales for publishing the outcomes of that phase?
Well, we've only just done the workshops for phase 2, and given that it's taken roughly 6 months for the first phase 1 report, although Rosie Lavis, who is the Research England lead on this project, is on the meeting, so Rosie may be able to give a better answer, but I wouldn't expect a phase 2 report before September.
Yeah, I agree, Tamsin. So we are, sorry, I can't undo my video. Oh,
Don't worry.
Okay. So, oh, yeah. Hello.
Hi, Rosie.
So yeah, we are looking to do a bit of a mop-up meeting following the workshops there. So it could take maybe another 6 weeks following that for the report to be written up, but certainly by September time, as you say, Tamsin, yeah, we'd like to have that published and out there, sat alongside phase 1 of the activity as well. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how phase 1, phase 2 sit together. So yeah, we will be organising that mop-up session soon. So if any of you were involved or you would like to be involved in that, please do make contact with either myself or Tamsin.
Yeah, and we'll let everybody know when that happens as well. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Any other questions or comments?
I would encourage people to go, if you haven't read the report, don't be put off by its length. Because a lot of it is in the annex, a lot of the length is in the annex, and you can safely skim read the detailed description of all these different theories of change models and still get quite a lot out. I would, you know, you can focus on the kind of, I think it's sections 1, 2, 3 and 5. You can kind of restrict yourself to those, and you'll get a pretty good idea of what they're driving at with the project.
I mean, we had a brief conversation about this, and we wondered, well, I guess I naively suggested, was this the introduction of pathways to impact for KE taken out of research?
Yeah, we should go and ask that crowd what they make of it. Yes, indeed. But
right.
But yeah, we'll see. I think we've been expecting, well, Alice has been flagging a kind of, I can't remember the word she uses exactly, but I think it's something like robust evaluation of HEIF. She's been kind of flagging this for the last year or so. So none of us should be surprised that this is happening. And I think if we want to make more ask of the budget in terms of HEIF funding, then we are going to need to really kind of improve our evidence base for what HEIF achieves.
I mean, I guess going on the kind of PraxisAuril ethos of sharing best practice, potentially, if some of this analysis highlights common activities with varying levels of ROI, then there may be some interesting learnings as a sector we can take from that. So it's not just about saying you should do this activity at the expense of this, but it might be saying if you're going to do this activity, then this is potentially a good way to go about it.
Yeah, exactly. The how. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so we are almost out of time, and I'm very conscious that I now did a future truth to Tony by saying that we would finish on time, so definitely not going to run over, or he's likely not to let me forget it. So any final questions or comments from MD? Oh, a new message. I'm excited. Oh no, it's just a thank you.
Thank you, Isabel.
Thanks, Isabel. Right, so we'll take our cue from Isabel. So thank you so much for joining us, Tamsin. It's a pleasure as always, and you've helped me a bit more detail into that document. So I hope everybody else found it useful. As I said, there's an ongoing discussion on our online community. You can access through the PraxisAuril site. So please, if you have any more questions or comments, go on there. Tamsin and I are taking a break next week. We've got a Sean Shed talk, try to do that quickly, with Tony Soterio, who's the Director of Commercialisation from Innovate UK. You can register and attend that Shed talk, which I think is it 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock? I can't remember.
It clashes with our usual slot, so we've been bumped. Yeah.
So he's pulled his chair card on us, and we'll probably be back. We'll be back the week after, and we'll try and post in advance what our topic is going to be. So thanks again for joining us. Thanks, Tamsin.
No, it's a pleasure.
Bye.
Everyone. Bye. Bye.